Hunger is back with us. Don't forget, folks, as we just said, you've got until 4 o'clock today to bid on a chance to join us for a live broadcast of Make It Plain in studio. So go to CharityBuzz.com and bid, or SiriusXM.com/Hungathon 2 days in a row.
2
Allison.
days in a row. You're going to be so sick of me, Mark.
Not at all. Not sick of you. You know, always. I'm still wearing my hoodie. Got my Wild Hunger hoodie on.
Awesome.
You all can go to wildhunger.org, right?
Yeah.
And bid and get back. You can
or
bid
hungathon.org.
on or hungathon.org,
yeah.
either one, and get you a hoodie too. So you'll be good. How you doing today?
I'm doing really well, thank you.
So, we're still trying to inform people about hunger and how it affects every part of the world. Alison, we've got a couple of guests with us now, and I'm going to let you, if you don't mind, introduce them to our audience. Okay. We don't. So
we just have one guest.
We just have one guest. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah.
Well, the guest that we do have.
Please. Okay. Niaz Dorry is the coordinating director of the Northwest Atlantic Marine Alliance, and she is working to organize fisher folk, particularly here in the United States. And she's also working with the World Forum of Fisher People and internationally. And unfortunately, our guest from Sri Lanka couldn't join us this morning, who organizes fishermen also in Sri Lanka. And Niaz, are you with us?
I am. Good morning.
Good morning, Niaz. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me. How are you all doing?
Just fine. Pleasure to have you. Yeah.
And Niaz, I'm sure folks are wondering, like, why hunger? They've been hearing a lot about why hunger, on Mark's show the last couple of weeks. He's been so generous to have us on several times, and but I'm sure they're wondering, why are we talking about organizing fishermen?
Well, I'm glad you're talking about organizing fishermen, and I should say it's been nice to listen to all the happy callers before we got on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your patience.
Oh, no worries. Happy to be waiting in the wings. A lot of folks don't consider seafood food. It's a funny thing to say because it is the only thing we eat that actually has the word food in it. But when it comes to issues around hunger, issues around access, issues around equity, particularly when it comes to food, for some reason we've left seafood out. Somewhere along the trajectory of food history, seafood became the food of those with privilege, and we forget that majority of people around the world live in coastal areas. They have had historical, cultural, religious, economic dependence on the marine ecosystem for their primary source of food and income, but for some reason we haven't included it in our strive for equity and food access and dealing with hunger. Here in the U.S., a lot of folks that have limited access to food end up fishing in polluted waters and lakes as their only source of protein. A lot of folks who have had access to seafood have not had it because a lot of farmers markets have stopped carrying it. A lot of seafood ends up in white tablecloth restaurants and inaccessible to majority of us. And so we're working to change that. We're working not only to make sure seafood is something that those with a lot of options can have access to, but those who have no option should have access to. It's historically been available to folks, and the market, these neoliberal market-based strategies of the last 30 some odd years have made it inaccessible. So it's really important for us to bring it front and center onto our plates, onto our minds, and to talk about it with fishermen who have also forgotten that their primary role is producers of food, not to feed the global commodities of scale. So it's taken some work for us to do that organizing, but as we've been doing more and more of it over the past 10 to 20 years, we're seeing an emergence of fishing communities who are putting food production at the forefront of their thinking as well.
I think it's important, Niaz, maybe you can speak to this a little bit. I've had the pleasure of getting to know one of your board members who is still fishing off the coast of Massachusetts. And she was telling me about the work that she does and Nama does as well with a lot of fishing families that themselves are needing to take advantage of food stamps.
That's right. You're talking about Shannon
Yes.
Eldridge, who's our board president, and she's a fourth-generation fisherman out of Cape Cod. And Cape Cod is one of those idyllic coastal communities that we think about. She lives in Chatham. She fishes and lives in Chatham. And yet majority of the folks who live there who actually do the fishing do end up having to go to the food banks and pantries for food. It's not unlike what we hear about farmers and farm workers who are putting food on our table, yet they have themselves limited access to food. One of the most egregious examples of how those who produce food are dealing with malnutrition and lack of access is probably the example of farm shrimp. It's one of those things that we all really want to have our cocktail shrimp and those big old jumbo shrimps. But a lot of folks don't realize that in order to get that at what we call a cheap price, a lot of communities in Southeast Asia in particular, farmers have had their land flooded with seawater. It's no longer habitable for their animals and for their crops so that we can raise farm shrimp, cheap farm shrimp. They are dealing with malnutrition. They're dealing with lack of food. And unfortunately for them, they don't have access to the food pantries the way we do here so that they can go somewhere to get something at least to hold them over. But it's all a matter of scale. Over there, it's probably the most egregious example of lack of access by our food producers to actual food, even their own food. Here, it happens in our coastal communities that are home to second homes and a lot of folks with privilege, yet the people who live there 12 months out of the year have to seek out public assistance to put food on their tables.
And folks, these are folk who are, well, what's the gender neutral term these days? Because we always say fishermen.
Yeah.
What do we say now, Niaz? You kind of stumped me. I want to say the right thing.
I know. I feel the same way.
Fisher persons.
We have this question all the time, and to be honest, I ask any woman that fishes. I ask them because a lot of the women, I would say majority of the women that we work with and who lead our work, and we know, and I've gotten to know over the last 25 years of working on fisheries issues, when I ask them what they like to be called, they call themselves fishermen. They consider, for the most part, that term is a gender-neutral term. Okay. At the same time, many of them say, oh, we should have fisherwomen, we should call ourselves something different, but then they all go back to calling themselves fishermen.
Yeah.
So it really, I would ask the person, but I would say for now you can probably get away with calling them fishermen as a gender-neutral term.
Half past the hour with Alison Cohen and Niaz Dorry. So I guess, Alison, as Niaz was saying in her opening statement, we don't always think of seafood as food or fisheries as farms themselves, right? We talk about the farm crisis and what farms are able to provide and the support they have. But we have to include fisheries in that regard as well, don't we?
Yes, we absolutely do. And the small-scale fisheries are under threat around the world. I was talking to Herman from NAFSO, who who lives and organizes fisher folk in Sri Lanka, and he was telling me that they're constantly battling the tourism industry that wants to come in and put up huge hotels on top of mangroves that where fish spawn, that are the primary source of food and income for hundreds of fisher families all along the coast. And so there's, I think that and Niaz can speak to this as well, but the small scale farming in this country has been under threat for decades because of the consolidation of the of agribusiness. And we're seeing the same thing in fisheries, with the emphasis on privatizing the ocean and on the something called catch shares that I think Niaz can speak to as well. And it's all regulated by something that it's not regulated in the Farm Bill. It's regulated in what Niaz calls, and the fishermen that she works with, the Fish Bill, and she can speak to that as well, because it's coming up and it's an important thing for us to be paying attention to.
The Fish Bill?
That's right, the Fish Bill. Its official name is the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation and Management Act. And even those of us who work on fisheries issues always get the name wrong. And we feel like it needs to be simplified for the public to understand that this is a bill that deals with our ocean. That's why we want to rename it the Fish Bill.
Okay.
And also
so
because
tell
it
us
has
about
a lot of similarities with the Farm Bill, with issues of access to food, issues of access to land, issues of price, issues of equity. So we want people to understand that the struggle of saving the seafood system and the ocean is not that different than the struggle of saving our land food system and land for farmers.
Indeed. Folks, quick calls, 866-99-SIRIUS, 866-997-4748. I'm kind of intrigued by something I'm looking at on the website right now. A letter to the Fulton Street Fish Market condemning claim of community-supported fishery. You all dispute that.
That's right. We actually piloted the model for community-supported fisheries, which is modeled after community-supported agriculture, where folks can pay the fisherman or the farmer in advance and pick up a share of seafood or produce or meat or dairy or what have you. And we did that in order to not only bring the eyes of the world to what's happening to community-based fishermen, but also to make sure they get a better price, that their communities are enriched by this process. And it's very much a community-based effort rooted in values. And then comes along Fulton Fish Market, one of the multinational, the second largest fish conglomerate in the world. And they have started what they call a community-supported fisheries, and we had to call them out on it, because part of what happens when you launch something, when you are creating a movement, and is co-option. And we felt that Fulton Fish Market was co-opting the system that fishermen are working really hard to create, and it's our job and our allies' job to call them out on it. So we wrote them that letter. They wrote back, and they've now offered to have a conversation with us. So we are organizing a group of fishermen to have that conversation with Fulton Fish Market. But we're not getting any answers as to why they're calling themselves that, and we've asked them to actually stop calling their program a community-supported fisheries, because it's far from it.
Is a community-supported fishery, I'm just trying to help my understanding, is that similar to what we would also call a farmer's market? Is there a similarity?
No.
It's not?
No, community-supported fishery is more like community-supported agriculture, which is, people know the acronym CSA.
Right.
It often means that you pay the farmer in advance.
In advance, okay.
And then you get a share every week.
Because the farmer's market, we just go there and shop, but that's not the same as,
it's
okay.
Exactly the same, right.
I got you. So,
although the community-supported fishery has opened up the access to selling seafood in many farmers markets, because it's served as drop-off locations for people's shares.
Sure.
And reintroduce seafood to farmers markets who'd forgotten about it.
Indeed. Niaz, Dorry, Alison, Cohen with us, folks. I want to go back to the Fish Bill, and that's the name that you all are calling it. So what is the status of that legislation right now? We're looking at reauthorization, right?
Is that it's in the process of reauthorization, right. Much like the Farm Bill and other legislation. It gets reauthorized every so many years, and the process has started a couple of years ago. It's been a very slow-moving train, and there have been hearings in both the House and the Senate side, and so what we're working on is to make sure that when this bill is reauthorized, that provisions that are currently allowing for the rights to fish to be privatized and for the ocean itself to be privatized are next at best, and at worst there's a moratorium on these privatization and consolidation policies, at least in the U.S. And then on an international scale, as Alison mentioned, we work with the World Forum of Fisher People to address these issues of privatization and consolidation at the United Nations level.
All right. For those who are listening, help us understand how their access to food that we didn't know was food, seafood, or we take for granted, how getting good and healthy seafood is right now jeopardized or not really as accessible as it should be.
Well, the first thing to keep in mind as to what's jeopardizing our access is that multinational corporations. This is a similar story.
Mm-hmm.
We've heard it before. We've heard it in what happened to our banks and our homes and our agriculture and our schools and our healthcare system. Multinational companies, Wall Street, those who put profits ahead of everything else have been given preferential treatment when it comes to owning the ocean and the access to the fishing industry's rights to fish. And it's the same thing that happened when banks got privatized and deregulated. The same thing has happened to the ocean for the past 10, 20, 30 years. And slowly what has happened is the seafood stream has become a commodity stream that's really just focused on global commodities market and not necessarily feeding people. And so a lot of seafood gets exported. Actually, in the U.S., we export a lot of our seafood and we import roughly 90% of the seafood that we eat. And interestingly enough, some of that seafood that is imported is first exported somewhere else to be processed and to be done something else with and then brought back into the U.S. and considered an import. And what that's done is not only does it affect how we fish, because the more we focus on commodities, the more the value is put into volume and not how we care for the fish. It's not about how much value we get out of the ocean. It's about how much volume we get out of the ocean. And what that does, first and foremost, is that it affects the health of the marine ecosystem. We want to shift the discussion away from volume being king and value being king, and that we want fishermen to focus on low volume, high value operations that feed their communities first. Second, this commodities-based thinking and this globalization of the seafood system has increased the production of industrial-scale aquaculture, fish farming, some people call it. But what ends up coming out of these fish farms is hardly considered food. Much of it is pumped full of antibiotics and pesticides and hormones, and degrades not only the area where these animals are grown, but the animals themselves, and by extension, our bodies
People
that end up consuming.
Yeah.
That's right. And so it's really important to realize that this commodities market, this global commodities market that puts value at the bottom of the chain of what we care about, has really created major access issues, major health issues, major ecological issues, and of course, ultimately major economic issues. But we can change that. We're already seeing a shift. The community-supported fisheries work was a way to reintroduce those, at least near coastal areas, to their right to seafood that is caught with conscience, that is actually feeding our communities. But we have to go beyond that. We're working with institutions like healthcare facilities and schools and universities to shift their purchasing power. And most importantly, we're working with a lot of communities to make sure that those who need access to it get access to it, and that we don't just keep seafood as the food of those who have a lot of options. That's where we need to focus our work on.
I think, again, just to bring this back to, we're in the middle of Hungerthon. Actually, we're at the end of Hungerthon, where it's wrapping up, and so we've been on a variety of different shows throughout Sirius XM. Most importantly here on Make It Plain. And one of the people are, I think, often ask, like, well, what is why hunger, and why is why hunger for instance, on the air talking about, these kinds of issues about fisheries and what's happening with the oceans. And the easiest way I can think to explain it is to use the old parable of if you give a man a fish, right? If you give, and this seems very, very apropos right now, but if you give a man a fish, right, they can eat for a day. You teach a man a fish, they can eat for a lifetime until the rivers become polluted, until the land is claimed, is grabbed for tourism. But if you support those most impacted by hunger and poverty, and people all along the food chain, workers all along the food chain, if you support them to organize, then they can live a life of freedom, of dignity, of economic justice, and that's what we're after. And that's why Hunger supports organizations like NAMA that are on the front lines organizing fisher folk who are impacted by hunger and economic injustice and are also feeding us. And one thing that Niaz said to me recently that I hold on to is that these are community-based fishermen that want to first and foremost feed their communities.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It does. You and I noticed that Niaz, Dorry, and Alison Cohen with us quarter before the hour. She said fisher folk, so I guess it's your.
I know that's my default. I know I'm trying to be, gender centric.
That's fine. But I'm just taking all this in because that's interesting unto itself. But also, folks, it seems to me, again, this is humanizing a form of farming and a form of labor that, again, I think we often take for granted. Fish just don't jump on our tables. I think
That's right.
that. As a matter of fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me it's even more of a challenging. See, if I plant something in the ground, and I plant the right way in the right season, in the right area, and the rains come, something's going to happen. That's pretty much guaranteed. It's not just going to stay in the ground. All right? But a lot of times when it comes to fishing, depending upon a whole lot of other factors, you may be plentiful or not, right? So it's more precious, more of a risk. A friend of mine once years ago loved to fish. He took me fishing when I was a teenager to a place where you literally could not catch fish. And it traumatized me, so I've never been fishing again because I sat out there for 6 hours and didn't catch nothing. Once when we got back home, I realized you couldn't catch no fish out there, no way. So, I just couldn't do it. And so I have an enormous respect for fisher folk or fisher people or fishermen because I went through that trauma. I know they don't go places where you don't catch fish. But that is work. And that is hard work. And so we want to support them in this work they do. Niaz, let me ask you this. The current administration in the White House, do they get it, or how does this regime affect the reauthorization of the fish bill or any of the other initiatives that you all are involved in?
Loaded question.
Okay.
One of the things that we're dealing with at the moment is the fact that majority of those we work with are white folks living in rural communities. In this case, rural coastal communities, and not too different than rural farming communities. And many of them, out of hopelessness, voted the way they did, and they will be frank to say that because they tried really hard with, and I know because I witnessed it, to get the old administration, many old administrations, to address the policies of privatization, the neoliberal agenda that we call the privatization consolidation, to no avail. And if they had their druthers, or if they were given the opportunity, they probably would have voted for Bernie Sanders. But they voted the way they did. So we.
You mean they voted? They voted for Trump?
They voted for Trump. Many of the folks we work with voted for Trump. They work in rural white communities, and that is the demographic that ended up voting the way they did. But it's not necessarily because that's what they believe. It's what they felt they were the only option they had because they felt the Democrats had betrayed them. That's the story we hear often. Mm-hmm. And so that's one piece of the puzzle, and we find it really important to take responsibility for doing a better job organizing in the communities that we work with. In fact, we're working on a campaign with our partner, the National Family Farm Coalition, that we call the Declaration of Interdependence, to show the similarities between family farmers and community-based fishermen, not only in their struggles but the opportunities. And to help them better not only get along with each other, but those who don't look like them or talk like them or eat like them or pray like them. And so that's a responsibility we take seriously. In terms of the administration, I have no hope that this administration will do anything different when it comes to the privatization policies. In fact, before the election, the week before the elections, when ourselves and the Federation of Southern Cooperatives and National Family Farm Coalition were meeting, we were discussing, well, what happens if Democrat gets elected or Republican gets elected? And what we realized was the policies we're fighting against are actually in many ways embraced by the Democratic Party and also embraced by the Republican Party. So we almost have bipartisan support for consolidation and privatization of our natural resources and actually anything that's not tied down, that's taken over by Wall Street. And so we were concerned about that outcome. And I'm still concerned about that outcome. I don't hear any major revolt in this administration against the corporate takeover of the marine ecosystem. And the marine conservation movement is so afraid of losing everything that they're holding on to this legislation really tightly, even if it includes these measures to privatize the ocean in perpetuity. So there's a lot to be concerned about with this administration, and that's part of what we hope to accomplish over the next few months is to really hit the road and to talk with fishing communities and the public about what threats there are and what opportunities there are, both in terms of legislative opportunities, but also our other forms of opportunities in terms of how we purchase seafood, how we interact with each other. There is more than just legislative policy that can change the system, and that's what we hope to lay out in 2018.
All right. Very, very interesting topic. I want to thank you for joining us, Niaz. Niaz, what's your website?
It's namanet.org, NAMANET.org. And also for folks that are interested in finding a community-supported fisheries or other values-based seafood businesses, they can go to our localcatch.org website to find that kind of a resource.
Catch.org.
Local catch.
Localcatch.org. Localcatch.org. Yeah. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for joining us, okay?
Thank you for having me.
And we'll have you back sometime and keep us posted about all this, including the reauthorization of the fish bill, okay?
Will do, anytime.
Thank you, Niaz.
Thank you, Niaz Dorry. Alison Cohen, congratulations on another great Hungathon. Now, how much longer does Hungathon itself go?
It goes until 4:30 today.
4:30 today.
You got a bid.
You got a bid.
I'm telling you, it's fun. It is fun to be here in studio with Mark.
So
and Brittany, you got to come in.
You and a friend can be a part of this. Bidding, go to CharityBuzz.com, SiriusXM.com/Hungathon. Bid on a number of things if you like. Thank you as always.
Thank you, Mark. Really, really appreciate it.
And we're going to be doing more with Why Hunger as well throughout the year. We promise. All right, folks. Look, Ring's mission is to make neighborhoods safer. Today, over 1 million people use the amazing Ring video doorbell to help protect their homes. Ring knows home security begins at the front door, but it does it in there. So now they're extending that same level of security to the rest of your home with the Ring Floodlight Cam. Just like Ring's amazing doorbell, Floodlight Cam is a motion-activated camera and floodlight that connects right to your phone with HD video and two-way audio that lets you know the moment anyone steps on your property. See and speak to visitors. Even set off an alarm right from your phone. With Ring's Floodlight Cam, when things go bump in the night, you'll immediately know what it is. Whether you're home or away, the Ring Floodlight Cam lets you keep an eye on your home from anywhere. Ring Floodlight offers the ultimate in-home security with high-visibility floodlights and a powerful HD camera that puts security in your hands. With Ring, you're always home. Save up to $150 off a Ring of Security kit when you go to ring.com/news. Ring.com/news. That's ring.com/news. We'll be right back. This is MIP.
Everywhere is war.